Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is your second class, and this class is for BCom honors students, finance and accountancy honors. Acha. Now, if we talk of the last class, in the last class we have already talked about the basics of environment. We talked about the definition of environment. We talked about the various components of the Earth's environment, etc., etc. And then we saw what was the importance of environmental studies. We also talked about or discussed environmental studies as an interdisciplinary subject, etc. Now in today's class we shall discuss two things. One is the concept of sustainability and sustainable development, and then we shall have a brief insight into the chapter on resources. Okay, now see, first we must understand the meaning of sustainability and sustainable development. Now development is a way of life. Development is a way by which people live out their lives. And when we talk of sustainable development is a form of development which focuses on meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So how do I define sustainable development? Sustainable development is a form of development which focuses on meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. And how did this concept of sustainability come up? Now, this concept of sustainability was officially defined in a report called as Our Common Future. This was officially defined in a report called Our Common Future, and this report was an outcome of the deliberation of a group which was constituted by the WCED, that is World Commission on Environment and Development. So this report, that is Our Common Future, was an outcome of the deliberation of a group which was constituted by WCED, that is World Commission on Environment and Development, and it was chaired by the then Norwegian Prime Minister, Mr. Gro Harlem Brundtland. And because it was chaired by Mr. Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was the then Prime Minister of Norway, so this is also called as the Brundtland Commission. So the Brundtland Commission came up with the report Our Common Future, and in that report Our Common Future, the development of sustainability, the definition of sustainable development was first formally announced. So sustainable development focuses on meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising on the ability of the future generation to meet their needs. Now we must understand what is the need of sustainable development. So whatever be the form of development, it obviously requires resources. Without resources there cannot be any development. Now if we go on utilizing resources in a way which is unsuitable, which is unsustainable, in that case obviously there will be acute resource crisis, there will be acute resource shortage. So to draw a balance between resource consumption and resource utilization, we focus on sustainable development. So sustainable development will definitely try to draw a balance between resource consumption and resource generation and resource utilization. Now the concept of sustainability was also discussed in an international seminar, in an international summit which was known as the Rio Summit, and this Rio Summit was held in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, in 1992. And in that international summit on sustainable development, extensively what policies are to be undertaken on a global basis to achieve sustainable development. This was discussed. Okay. Now, as far as sustainability is concerned, sustainability or sustainable development has three pillars on which this entire concept is standing. And the three pillars of sustainable development are environment, social, and economic. So, what are the three pillars of sustainable development? First pillar is the environment, second pillar is social, and the third pillar is the economic pillar. So, development can only be sustainable if we can achieve development in these three phases, or in this over these three fronts. That is the we can achieve environmental development, we can achieve social development, and we can achieve economic development. So development will only be sustainable if environment development, social development, and economic development goes hand in hand. Only then we can say that we are achieving what we can call as sustainable development. Now, this concept of sustainable development, it has some priority areas. So we must know that what are the priority areas of sustainable development, and on which areas we must focus to achieve sustainability. Now, the first such priority area is your slowing down the global population growth, the human population growth. Now, because more is the human population, there will be more pressure on resource consumption. There will be more pressure on resource consumption. So, until and unless we can achieve what you can say sustainable, until and unless we can achieve a reduction in population growth, we cannot, what you can say, achieve sustainability. Because with the ever increasing population, more and more will be the pressure building on resources. Next thing is the reduction of poverty, reduction of inequality, and the reduction in the debt of the third world. Reduction of poverty, reduction of inequality, and reduction of debt of the third world. Now, the third world countries practically refer to the countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, countries like Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, etc., where there is a lot of poverty. A lot of people live below the poverty lines. There is a lot of inequality related to resource distribution. And obviously, whatever you do in the third world, whatever developmental activities you take up in the third world, that comes with a debt, that comes with a burden of debt. So all the third world countries, they are under a huge burden of debt which has been acquired from the first world countries. So one of the primary aims or priority areas of sustainable development is definitely to reduce the poverty, reduce inequality, and reduce the debt of the third world. The third priority area about which we can talk of is to make agriculture sustainable. This is the third priority area, to make agriculture sustainable. Now, if we focus on short-term profits, that will not lead to sustainability as far as agriculture is concerned. So, short-term profits should not be the focus. The focus will be to achieve long-term benefits, achieve benefits which we can draw for a continuous length of time. And for that purpose, we must discourage harmful agricultural practices and promote sustainable agricultural practices. Say, for example, uncalculated amount of addition of fertilizers and chemicals to the soil, that is unsustainable. Or what you can say, adding of pesticides to kill pests and insects, that is also unsustainable, chemical pesticides. So sustainable agriculture will definitely focus on reduction of such harmful practices. It will focus on reduction of soil erosion and soil pollution, and it will focus on technologies that will help to prevent and reduce land degradation. Then comes the fourth priority area, which is protection of forests and other habitats. Now, forests, as we know, they are a large supplier of both ecological as well as economical goods and services. They are a large supplier of both ecological as well as economical goods and services, and they are the home to support a huge biodiversity. They are the home to support a huge biological diversity, both in terms of plants as well as animals. So, sustainability will definitely focus on the issues of reforestation, on the issues of controlling of what you can say reduction of air pollution, on the issues of global climate protection, because if the global climate is not protected, obviously you cannot protect the forests. So we will say that one of the key priority areas of sustainable development is definitely to protect forests as well as other habitats. And what is a habitat? A habitat is a place where an organism lives, dwells, and reproduces. A habitat is a place where an organism lives, dwells, and reproduces. So if we can conserve the forests, if we can conserve the various habitats, that may be a terrestrial habitat, land based, or that may be an aquatic habitat, water based, we can definitely conserve global biological diversity. The next priority area as far as sustainability is concerned is to make water and energy use sustainable. Now, in the third world countries, there is a massive crisis related to availability of clean, safe drinking water. There is a massive crisis related to energy insecurity. So, sustainable development will focus on water conservation. It will promote and focus on technologies which will help to conserve water, which will make water and energy use more efficient, because we cannot afford to waste water, neither can we afford to waste energy. And lastly, sustainable development will help to reduce waste generation. Now, whatever activities you can think of, be it an industrial activity or a commercial activity or some kind of domestic activity or an agricultural activity, all these activities are ultimately characterized by waste generation. So, one of the primary targets of sustainable development is to improve the production process, thereby reducing waste generation. And no matter how much we try, some amount of wastes will definitely be generated. And so sustainability will not only focus on reducing waste generation, but it will also focus on technologies associated with waste treatment and waste recycling. It will focus on technologies associated with waste treatment and waste recycling. So these are some of the priority areas of sustainable development. So I'm just repeating the priority areas. Number 1, slowing down population growth. Number 2, reducing poverty, inequality, and the third world debt. Number 3, to make agriculture sustainable. Number 4, to protect the forests and various other habitats in which organisms live, dwell, and reproduce. To make water and energy use sustainable, and to reduce waste generation. So these are some of the priority areas of sustainable development. So with that we come to the end of the first chapter. Where we have studied, where we got an introduction to what you can say environment and environmental studies. The next chapter about which we shall begin our discussion, that is about resources. So that is our next chapter, resources. And in this chapter on resources, we will primarily focus on natural resources. So first, let us understand what exactly is a natural resource, or a resource, to be honest. Now, as far as a resource is concerned, a resource is anything that we obtain from the living or non-living environment which satisfies our needs. ठीक है? Remember, resource cannot satisfy greed because greed is limitless. So resource is anything that we acquire, that we procure from the natural environment, that may be a living or non-living entity, which satisfies our needs but not greed. Now, very importantly, uh, to call something as a resource, it must satisfy some characteristic features. So that we must understand ki what are the characteristic features of a resource. Now, to call something as a resource, the basic characters which it must satisfy are: number one, it must have some kind of a functionality. Every resource must serve some kind of a function. It must have some functionality. Resource must also have serviceability. The resource must provide us with some services. Then the resource must be acceptable. That means the resource must have acceptability. Then the resource must have some demand. Obviously, the resource must be eco-friendly, and the resource must be able to preserve the biosphere. Okay, so these are some of the vital characteristics of a resource. So what are the characteristics of a resource? I'm repeating. First and foremost, it must have functionality. Number two, it must have serviceability. Number three, it must have acceptability. Number four, it must have demand. If something doesn't have a demand, we cannot call it to be a resource. And then it must have acceptability. People must accept the substance as a resource. And then it must be eco-friendly. And lastly, it must be able to preserve the biosphere. It must be able to preserve the biosphere. So these are some of the basic characteristics of a resource. Now, after we talk about these things, then after we talk about resource characteristics, the next thing which we must talk of is about the classification of resource. The next thing about which we can talk of is the classification of a resource. Okay. Now, the general classification which we need for our examination purpose is primarily of two types. One is a renewable resource, which you can call as inexhaustible, and the other is a non-renewable resource, which you can call as exhaustible. So these are the two basic types of resources about which we are interested: renewable and non-renewable. Now, if we are talking of renewable resources, now these resources are present in nature in infinite amounts, and they are regenerated in a very short span of time. They are present in nature in infinite amounts, and they are regenerated in a very short span of time. And that means you can say these are flow resources. Say for example, solar energy, solar resource. Even if we try our best, we cannot exhaust the solar resource. Wind energy, it cannot be exhausted. So because renewable resources have an infinite stock, we cannot exhaust them. That is why they are also called inexhaustible resources. Then what are your exhaustible resources, which are non-renewable? Now these are supposed to be the stock resources, whose amount in nature are limited. Say for example, the fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, etc. Say for example, the mineral resources, gold, silver, iron, etc., copper, platinum. Now these mineral resources, they are also limited in stock, and the problem is it has taken millions of years to form these resources by natural processes, but we are utilizing them at a rapid rate. So the rate of resource utilization or the rate of resource use is much more than the rate of resource formation. And as a result, it is quite accepted, or it is quite, what you can say, anticipated that these resources will definitely get exhausted in the near future. Okay? So these are the two broad types of resources. Now, apart from that, you can classify resources based on their biological properties. For example, you can call a resource biotic resource or abiotic resource. Now, biotic resources are those which we obtain from the living world, which we obtain from the living environment. For example, plants and animals. And abiotic resources are those which are the non-living resources which we obtain from the environment. So biotic resources are living resources. All your food resources are biotic, be it a plant food or an animal food. And then you have your abiotic resources, which are non-living resources, which can be fossil fuels, which can be minerals, etc., etc. Now, the other type which we have talked of just now, depending on whether it's renewable or non-renewable, we have talked on that feature, renewable resource and non-renewable resource. And then you can also classify resources as natural resources, which are present in nature, which naturally occur in nature, soil, climate, water, forests. These are all natural resources. Then you have man-made resources, resources which are created by man. Say, for example, human resource, which you can call as human resources, man-made resources. For example, say the basic service providers in the society, a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer. These are all our human resources. And then you have cultural resources. Now, the cultural resources will include our scientific knowledge, our education, our technical capabilities, our behavior. These are all classified as cultural resources. So there is a broad classification about resources, but we will primarily stick to exhaustible and inexhaustible. Exhaustible are the non-renewable ones, and inexhaustible are the renewable ones. Okay. Now, after having a brief introduction about resources, now I would ask you to note down what resources you will study for your examination purposes. I will ask you to note down what resources you will study for your examination purposes. So please note down. Number one, you will study about forest resources. You will study about forest resources. Okay. Then, after studying about forests, you will study about water resources. Forest resource, you will study about water resource. Then you will study about your what you can say, mineral resources. You will be studying about mineral resources. And after studying about mineral resources, you will study about food resources. You will study about food resource. Then you will study about land resource. And very importantly, you will study about energy resources. Very importantly, you will study about energy resources. So what are the types of resources you will study for your exam? Number one, forests. Number two, water. Number three, you will study about energy resources. Number four, mineral resources. And number five, land resources. And that's all. And food resources. Number six, food resource. So these are the basic types of resources about which you will be studying. Now, out of all these resources, you must also know what to study. Now, say for example, if you are studying forest resources, so you must know what are the benefits that you obtain from the forest. Okay. And then you must know what are the causes of deforestation, and what are the ill effects of deforestation, causes of deforestation and ill effects of deforestation. So these two things you must study. Then, as far as water resources are concerned, you will study about the distribution of the water resources. How much is fresh water? Fresh water is less than what you can say, less than 1% of fresh water is available to us. ठीक है, and globally more than 97% is salt water, which is not available to us. So you will study about the distribution of these water resources. You will study about water conservation, particularly say rooftop rainwater harvesting. You will study about forest conservation. Then if you are studying about the mineral resources, you must know about the various types of mineral resources, what are the uses of these mineral resources, and then study about the harmful impacts of mining. So please note down what you have to study. And then after all this, when you are studying your energy resources, now energy resources you will come across two types. One is your conventional energy. Conventional money which we have been using for a long span of time. Primarily that includes the fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, natural gas, etc. And then comes your non-conventional resources. Non-conventional money which we are using, which we have been using only quite recently. Say for example, solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, tidal energy, etc., etc., nuclear power. So these are your non-conventional. So definitely study about these conventional, non-conventional energy resources, and study what are their advantages and what are the disadvantages associated with them. And also study about the principle of what we can say power generation. Study about the principle of power generation, how energy is prepared or utilizing these resources. So these are the things which you need to study. Okay. Now apart from that, you will definitely study about food resources, and in food resources you have to compulsorily study about food security. In food resources you need to compulsorily study about food security. Then you also need to study about global food crisis. You need to study about global food crisis. So these are the what you can say things which you will be studying in the chapter on resources. Don't worry, I'll be providing you with some notes. I'll be providing you with some PDF formats pertaining to this chapter on resources. Okay. Now if anyone has any questions, if any one of you have any questions, please ask me. If anyone have any,
আপনি আগের ক্লাসেও কি এমনি পিডিএফ পাঠিয়েছিলেন ফার্স্ট চ্যাপ্টারে?
আমি এখনো কিছু নোটস দিইনি, দেওয়া শুরু করব। আগে একটা দুটো চ্যাপ্টার হয়ে গেলে আমি নোটসটা দেওয়া শুরু করব। ইংলিশেই দিয়ে দেবো তো, প্রবলেম নেই তো?
না স্যার, আমার তো বেঙ্গলি ভার্সন।
বেঙ্গলি ভার্সন? তাহলে ঠিক আছে, আমি বাংলাতেও দিয়ে দেবো, ইংলিশেও দিয়ে দেবো, তাহলে অসুবিধা হবে না। এমনি ক্লাসটা ফলো করতে পারছিস তো?
আমি এই ফার্স্ট ক্লাস, এটা আমার মানে আমি একটু পরে জয়েন করছি।
ঠিক আছে, আমি বলছি এমনি ক্লাস ফলো করতে অসুবিধা হচ্ছে না তো?
না, একটু নেটওয়ার্ক প্রবলেম যা হচ্ছে।
হ্যাঁ, তাছাড়া এমনি মানে বুঝতে অসুবিধা হচ্ছে না তো?
বাংলায় না ঠিক আছে।
ঠিক আছে, অসুবিধা হলে আমাকে জিজ্ঞেস করে নিবি, যেটা অসুবিধা হবে আমাকে জিজ্ঞেস করে নিবি, ঠিক আছে? ঠিক আছে।
আর স্যার এক্সট্রা তাহলে কোনো আর বই ফই কিনতে হবে না আশা করি?
নোট দিয়ে দিলে আর বই বিশেষ লাগবে না, তবুও যদি বই কিনতে চাস কিনে নিতে পারিস। আমি বই বলে দিচ্ছি বেঙ্গলি ভার্সানের জন্য। বেঙ্গলি ভার্সানের জন্য তুই ডক্টর পৃথা ভট্টাচার্যর বইটা কিনতে পারিস।
ঠিক আছে।
ডক্টর পৃথা ভট্টাচার্য, বা বেঙ্গলি ভার্সানের জন্য তুই ডক্টর অনিশ চট্টোপাধ্যায়, এই বুকসগুলো নিতে পারিস। ডক্টর পৃথা ভট্টাচার্য বা ডক্টর অনিশ চট্টোপাধ্যায়, ঠিক আছে? হ্যাঁ, আর ইংলিশ ভার্সানের জন্য অনেক বুকস অ্যাভেলেবেল আছে মার্কেটে। যেমন ধর তুই সুজন কুমার বালা, ডক্টর সুজন কুমার বালা এর বুকসটা কিনতে পারিস। কিংবা আর একটা বুক আছে পার্সপেক্টিভস ইন এনভায়রনমেন্টাল স্টাডিজ, ওই বুকটাও কেনা যায়। আমার রাইটারের নামটা মনে পড়ছে না। বুকটার নাম হচ্ছে পার্সপেক্টিভস ইন এনভায়রনমেন্টাল স্টাডিজ, ঠিক আছে? সিপি কৌশিক, অনুভা কৌশিক, থ্যাংক ইউ মনে করিয়ে দেওয়ার জন্য। হ্যাঁ, তো ওই বুকটাও পড়তে পারিস, ঠিক আছে? এমনি সাবজেক্টটা ওভারঅল ইজি, খুব বিশেষ কিছু নেই। যা আমি ক্লাসে বলছি সেগুলোই আসে এক্সামে। যে টপিকসগুলো পড়তে বলবো ওগুলোই পড়বি বেশি করে, আর খুব ডিটেলসে পড়ার দরকার নেই। মানে তোরা তো সায়েন্সের নোস যে একদম সেই দারুণ ডিটেলসে পড়তে হবে, জাস্ট ওভারঅল একটা কনসেপ্ট থাকতে হবে যাতে এক্সামে লিখতে পারিস।
তাহলে আপনার পিডিএফ গুলো পড়ে গেলেই হয়ে যাবে?
হ্যাঁ, পিডিএফগুলো পড়ে গেলেই হয়ে যাবে। আমি পিডিএফগুলো দিয়ে দেবো, দেখ কিছুদিনের মধ্যে, 1-2 দিনের মধ্যে দিয়ে দেবো। ফার্স্ট চ্যাপ্টারটা সেকেন্ড চ্যাপ্টারের পিডিএফ করে আমি দিয়ে দেবো, ঠিক আছে? ঠিক আছে। এনিওয়ান এলস উইথ এনি আদার ডাউটস?
নো স্যার, নো স্যার।
ঠিক আছে, তাহলে ক্লাসটা এন্ড করবো। ওকে। আর ক্লাসটার রেকর্ডিংটা আমি এক্ষুনি ইউটিউবে আপলোড করে দেবো, যারা ক্লাস করেনি ওখান থেকে করে নিতে পারবে, ঠিক আছে?
ইউটিউব চ্যানেলটার নাম বলেননি।
আচ্ছা
চ্যানেলটার নামটা বলেননি স্যার।
আচ্ছা, আমি চ্যানেলটার নামটা টাইপ করে দিচ্ছি, আমি নামটা টাইপ করে দিচ্ছি। হ্যাঁ,
सर चैनल को
बोलो।
चैनल को लिंक शेयर कर दीजिए ना।
हाँ, बेसिक्स ऑफ एनवायरनमेंट बाय Sayantan Datta. This is the name of the channel, Basics of Environment by Sayantan Datta. You can type it in the YouTube and you will be getting it. Most of the students have subscribed to it, so subscribe to the channel. In case you are not able to attend the direct class, all the class recordings will be available, so you can listen to every class. So prior to the exams I'll be discussing with you the important questions, topics, so subscribe to the channel. ঠিক আছে? যেমন today's class I'll be uploading it very shortly. যারা ক্লাস করিসনি তারা ওখান থেকে আরেকবার শুনে নিতে পারবে, ঠিক আছে?
বলছি যে দুটো ভার্সনই अवेलेबल না অনলি ওয়ান ভার্সন?
না, দুটো ভার্সনই অ্যাভেলেবেল আছে, দেখবি অনেক ভিডিওস আছে, ঠিক আছে? আর ভিডিওসগুলোর না ডেসক্রিপশান দেওয়া আছে যে কোনটা কোন টপিকের ওপর আছে, এবার তুই চয়েস করে করে শুনতে থাক, ওকে? ঠিক আছে, ঠিক আছে, ওকে,
গুড বাই স্যার।
হ্যাঁ, গুড বাই।
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
হুম হুম
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
হুম